Blood test came back on a Tuesday, and the nurse who handed me the results looked at me like I'd done something wrong. I hadn't gone to the clinic for anything dramatic. I was 31, tired, and my doctor had flagged low iron 2 appointments in a row. Routine blood work. That's all it was supposed to be. But the nurse, young, maybe 25, clearly new, kept looking from the paper to my face and back again, and finally she said she needed to get someone else. Not a doctor, someone else. I sat in that small room with the paper crinkle on the examination table and the poster about hand washing on the wall, and I thought, I'm dying. That's what this is. Some rare thing they found in my blood count, and now they need to figure out how to tell me. But it wasn't that. The woman who came in introduced herself as the clinic's patient advocate. She had a calm, practiced voice, the kind people develop when they deliver bad news for a living. She sat across from me and she said that my blood type, the one on file, the one my mother had registered when I was born, was impossible. Not wrong in the way a typo is wrong. Impossible in the way that two parents with type A and type O blood cannot produce a child with type AB. Which is what I am. She said it gently. She said there were explanations. Lab errors, outdated records. She said not to panic. I drove home in a kind of silence that had texture to it, like static you can almost hear. I kept both hands on the wheel the whole way back to my apartment in Barrie, Ontario, 40 minutes north of the city, and I didn't turn on the radio once. I need to go back a little because the blood type was just the door. What was behind it? That took another 4 months to fully open. I grew up thinking I was the difficult one. My stepfather had made that clear in the way that men who never raise their voices can make things clear. Through sighs, through silences, through the particular way he'd look at me across the dinner table like I was a problem he hadn't budgeted for. My mother was softer about it, but no less consistent. I was sensitive, she'd say. I took things the wrong way. I was too much. His name was Walter. Walter had 2 kids from his first marriage, a son 2 years older than me, a daughter 4 years younger, and they were, by every visible measure, the real family. Christmas mornings, the right gifts, the photographs hung in the hallway. I was in some of those photographs, but not the way they were. They were centered. I was off to one side, a little blurred, like someone had moved. I left at 18. Not dramatically. I just applied to college in Ottawa, got in, and didn't come back except for holidays. And even those stopped eventually once Walter's comments about my lifestyle choices, by which he meant living alone, not married, working as a bookkeeper for a small construction firm instead of doing something he considered respectable, became a kind of background noise I no longer felt like tolerating. My mother called on birthdays. We were polite. It was fine. I told myself it was fine. So when the clinic flagged my blood type, my first thought wasn't some grand revelation. My first thought was, my mother had an affair and my biological father is someone I've never met. That felt sad and manageable. People find this out. They process it. They move on. I called her that evening. I don't know why, Mom Idisam. I asked her as directly as I could whether Walter was my biological father. There was a pause on the line that went on too long. Of course he is, she said. There must be a mistake with the records. She said it the way she'd always said things that weren't quite true, smoothly, without inflection, like she'd been waiting for the question and had prepared the answer ahead of time. I believed her for about 3 weeks. Then I did the DNA test. I'd ordered it online, one of the standard consumer kits, the kind you spit into a tube and mail back. The kind that tells you you're 42% British Isles and connects you to third cousins you've never heard of. I wasn't expecting anything. I was just eliminating possibilities. The results came on a Thursday morning while I was eating toast at my kitchen table. I opened the app on my phone, expecting to see my mother's family on the match list. Her side is from Sudbury. Lots of Finnish and French-Canadian ancestry. Very recognizable surnames. I didn't see a single name I recognized. Not one, not my mother, not her sister, not the cousins I'd grown up seeing at family reunions. Nothing. Just strangers with surnames that meant nothing to me, and a note at the top of the match list that said, Close family, parent/child or sibling 49.8% shared DNA. The name attached to that match was a woman I'd never heard of. I'll call her by her first name, Isabel. I stared at that name for a long time. Then I clicked on her profile. Isabel had a profile photo. She was in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a smile that looked like it cost her something to hold. She had posted a note on her profile that was just 3 sentences long, looking for a daughter born in the fall of 1993 in the Hamilton area. She may not know she was adopted. Please reach out. I put my phone face down on the table. I picked it up again. I put it down again. My hands were shaking, which surprised me because I hadn't thought I had anything left to lose. I was born in October of 1993 in Hamilton, Ontario. I sat there for 4 hours. I didn't message her. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there while the toast got cold and the morning turned into afternoon, and then I opened my laptop and started making a list of everything I actually knew for certain about my own life. It was a shorter list than I expected. I finally messaged Isabel on a Saturday. I kept it simple. I said I'd found her profile and that I thought we might be related and that I had some questions if she was willing to talk. I pressed send before I could rewrite it for the 5th time. She responded in 11 minutes. We video called that same afternoon. She was sitting in a kitchen in Oakville. I could see a window behind her, bare trees, gray November sky, and when my face appeared on her screen, she made a sound I can't fully describe. Not quite a cry. More like something that had been held in a long time suddenly had somewhere to go. She told me her daughter had been taken from the hospital. Not given up for adoption. Taken. 3 days after birth, during a shift change from the nursery at Hamilton General, the baby had been there and then she hadn't been. There was an investigation. There were suspects. Nothing was ever resolved. Isabel and her husband had spent years working with a private investigator, following leads that went nowhere, filing requests, waiting. Her husband had died in 2019. He never found out what happened to their daughter. She said all of this in a voice that was very steady, which I understood immediately, because I also have a voice I use when I'm telling something true that I've had to say too many times. She asked me if I knew anything about how I'd come to live with the family I grew up in. I told her what I knew, which wasn't much. My mother had told me she'd had a difficult pregnancy and a fast delivery. I was born at a small clinic outside of Hamilton. Not the main hospital, a private women's health clinic that had apparently closed in the late 90s. My birth certificate showed my mother's name and Walter's name. Everything looked correct, if you didn't look closely. But you're not supposed to have to look closely. That's the whole point. After we hung up, I sat on my apartment floor with my back against the couch, and I thought about something Walter had said to me when I was 16 during one of our arguments. I don't even remember what the argument was about, but I remember him stopping in the middle of it, very calm, and saying, "Do you have any idea what it cost to keep you?" I had thought he meant emotionally. The burden of raising a difficult child. That's what I thought he meant. He meant it literally. The private investigator that Isabel had worked with was retired, but she still had all the files. She connected me with a lawyer in Toronto who specialized in what she called historical adoption and child displacement cases, which is a very careful phrase for something that is, in plain language, a crime. The lawyer's name was Mr. Osei, and he was the kind of person who delivers devastating information in such an organized way that you almost don't feel it until later. He told me, across a glass conference table on a gray December afternoon, that based on the documentation Isabel had provided and the DNA results, what appeared to have happened was this: a woman, likely operating to the private clinic, had facilitated the transfer of infants from hospital nurseries to paying families. Not a formal adoption, not through any recognized agency, a transaction. Falsified birth records. Forged discharge paperwork. The clinic had closed before anyone started asking the right questions, and the paper trail had gone deliberately cold. Walter and my mother had paid for me. I had to ask him to repeat that, not because I hadn't heard it, because I needed to hear it twice to let it be real. Walter and my mother had paid to receive an infant girl, obtained through what Mr. O.C. carefully referred to as the regular means. They had raised me knowing. They had known every single day. Do you know what it cost to keep you? Not emotionally. Financially. Walter had spent 31 years being resentful of the money. I want to be honest about what the weeks after that felt like, because I think people expect a certain kind of reaction, either collapse or rage, and what I actually felt was closer to a very deep cold. Like something that had always been slightly wrong about my life had finally been correctly diagnosed, and the diagnosis was worse than I'd imagined, and I couldn't decide if the clarity was a relief or just a different kind of pain. I kept going to work. I kept eating. I called Isabel every few days and we talked. Carefully, the way people talk when they're building something fragile and they don't want to push too hard. She had another child, a son, 2 years older than me, who lived in Vancouver. She sent me a photo of him. He had the same nose I do. I had never in my life looked at someone and seen my own face reflected back at me. I was not prepared for how much that would mean. Mr. Osei filed a formal complaint with the Ontario Provincial Police in January. He also reached out to a federal crown attorney he had a working relationship with, because falsifying birth certificates and trafficking infants across what may have been multiple jurisdictions made this a matter that could escalate beyond provincial jurisdiction. Walter was visited by 2 officers in February. I know this because my mother called me the morning after, and for the first time in my memory, her voice was not smooth. It was the voice of someone whose carefully maintained story was coming apart, and she didn't know yet how much I already knew, and so she was trying to find out without giving anything away. She asked if I'd been making calls. She said there had been some misunderstanding. She said Walter was very upset, and that whatever I thought I knew, I should talk to the family before I talked to anyone else. I told her that the time for talking to the family had passed. She started to say something about how hard it had been for them, how they had wanted a child, how the system had failed them, and they'd had no choice but to find another way. And I let her talk because I needed to hear it, and also because I was recording the call, which Mr. Ariat Osei had advised me was legal in Ontario when you're a party to the conversation. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't cry. I just listened while my mother explained in halting and increasingly desperate terms that she had loved me, that she had always loved me, even when it was hard. I believed her, actually. I think she did love me in her way. But love doesn't make a kidnapping into something else. Love doesn't give you the right to purchase someone's child. The investigation took most of the year. There were other families involved. The clinic had not done this only once, and the Crown Attorney's Office ultimately identified 6 cases spanning from 1990 to 1997. Walter and my mother were not the only people who had paid. They were also not the most culpable. The woman who had run the clinic, then in her late 70s, living quietly in a condo in Burlington, had facilitated all of it. She was the one who had recruited hospital staff, forged documents, collected payments. She was charged in August. Walter and my mother were charged separately as knowing recipients of a child obtained through criminal means. The specific charge took some legal construction because Canadian law in this area is, as Mr. Osei put it dryly, not as unambiguous as one might hope. But the Crown was thorough and patient, and they got there. The thing I didn't expect was the civil case. Mr. Osei had mentioned it early on, but I hadn't fully absorbed what it meant. It turned out that Walter, methodical, careful, resentful Walter, had, for reasons I still don't fully understand, put a significant portion of his financial assets into accounts in my name during my childhood. He'd told my mother it was for tax purposes. It may have been, in part, a kind of hedge. Some part of him perhaps understanding that what he'd done could eventually be unwound and wanting the money shielded. What he hadn't understood was that money held in my name, obtained during the period when I was living in their household under a false identity, could become subject to what Mr. Osei called a constructive trust claim. The money had been sheltered in my name without my knowledge or consent. The court could effectively say that money was always hers even if she didn't know it. I did not fully understand this when it was explained to me. I understood it better when the judgment came through. I understood it completely when I saw the number. I'm not going to say the number, but it was enough, more than enough. Enough to make the years feel, if not fair, nothing makes it fair, then at least acknowledged. Like the court was saying, we see what was taken from you. We cannot give it back in full, but we can give you this. Isabel came to Barrie in October. She drove up on a Saturday morning, and we had lunch at a place near the water, and it was awkward in the way that all true things are awkward when you're meeting them for the first time. She kept looking at me. I kept looking at her. At one point, she reached across the table and touched my hand, just for a moment, and didn't say anything. Her son flew in from Vancouver the following weekend. He's funny and a little guarded, and he makes the same joke twice when he's nervous, which is something I apparently also do according to my work colleagues. We went for a walk along Kempenfeld Bay, and he said, very casually, that he'd been looking for me his whole life without knowing what he was looking for. He said it like it wasn't a big deal in the way that Canadians sometimes say the most significant things. The criminal proceedings are ongoing. I'm not supposed to say too much about specifics. What I can say is that all three of them, the woman from Burlington, Walter, and my mother, have entered pleas and sentencing is scheduled for later this year. My mother asked to see me through her lawyer. I said no. Maybe someday. Not yet. I have a name. My real name. The name Isabel had picked out before I was taken. The name on the birth record she'd filed before I disappeared from the nursery. It's a simple name. Shorter than the one I grew up with. It surprised me when I heard it, and then it didn't. The way some true things feel like a surprise, and then feel like they were always obvious. I still go to work on Monday mornings. I still eat toast at my kitchen table. I still drive the same roads and shop at the same grocery store and live in the same apartment I've lived in for 6 years. The external shape of my life looks nearly identical to what it looked like before a blood test came back on a Tuesday and a nurse looked at me like I'd done something wrong. But I know who I am now. All the way down in my blood, in the records that have been corrected and filed and sealed with the court stamp, I know where I come from and I know what was done to me. And I know for the first time since I was a child sitting off to one side of a family photograph that I was not the problem. I was never the problem. I was the person they couldn't afford to let be found. I keep thinking about that blood test. How ordinary it was. Low iron, a tired doctor, a requisition form. Nothing about that Tuesday morning suggested it would be the thing that unraveled 31 years of carefully maintained silence. That's how it usually works, I think. The truth doesn't arrive with sirens. It comes in quietly, through a side door you didn't know was there. A routine appointment, a consumer DNA kit, a nurse who doesn't know how to hide what she's just seen on a screen. Walter spent 3 decades believing he had sealed every possible exit. He was meticulous about it, and in the end, it was a vial of blood and a $40 mail-in test that opened everything back up. There's something I've had to sit with about Walter specifically. He wasn't stupid, he wasn't careless. He was, in his way, a man who thought carefully about consequences. He'd structured his finances, he'd maintained a story, he'd kept my mother aligned with his version of events for over 30 years, and none of it protected him in the end because the thing he'd built his security on was a lie. The lie was load-bearing. When it went, everything built on top of it went with it. That's not punishment in any dramatic sense. It's just how weight works. I've thought about what it would have taken to make different choices. His choices at the beginning when he and my mother first agreed to what they agreed to. I don't think they were monsters in the way people imagine monsters. I think they wanted something, and someone told them there was a way to get it, and they chose not to ask too many questions. That choosing, that deliberate looking away is what I keep returning to. Because the looking away wasn't free. It cost me 31 years of not knowing who I was. It cost Isabel 31 years of searching. It cost her husband his entire remaining life. Choices compound. That's the part people forget when they're making them. What I had to develop through all of this The investigation, the legal process, the calls with Isabel, the slow and sometimes painful work of building something real with her and her son was a kind of clear-eyed thinking I hadn't needed before. I had to learn to read documents carefully, to ask Mr. Osei the same question 3 different ways until I actually understood the answer, to sit with complicated information without immediately needing it to resolve into something simple. I wasn't naturally good at that. I had spent most of my adult life keeping my head down and not asking too many questions, because that's what my childhood had trained me to do. Learning to look directly at hard things, that took deliberate effort. I'm still working on it. And then there was the matter of just continuing. Getting up every Monday morning, going to work, eating, sleeping, calling Isabel, walking around Kempenfeld Bay with her son, making the same joke twice when I was nervous, finding out that this too was inherited. The story didn't pause while I processed it. Life kept its ordinary rhythm, and I had to keep moving inside that rhythm even when I was also, simultaneously, completely undone. That's the part nobody really prepares you for. Not the dramatic moments, but the long middle stretch where you have to just keep going without knowing yet how it resolves. I am someone's daughter. I have a brother in Vancouver with my nose. I have a name that was chosen for me before anyone had a chance to take it away. I got all of that back. Not because the universe owed it to me, and not through luck, but because I asked the right question, followed where it led, and didn't stop when it got difficult. That's the only thing I know for certain that I'd pass on to anyone,